One of the biggest challenges leaders face when managing multicultural organizations is getting everyone on the team to be engaged and to participate. Typically, one or two people do most of the talking, while many others sit quietly on the sidelines. But just because someone is hesitant to speak up in meetings doesn't mean that they don't have any ideas or insights to share. So how do we help our more introverted team members speak up, especially when English might not be their native language? I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to join me here. It's wonderful to have you as part of our international community that now includes top-performing executives like you from over 100 countries. It's great to know that so many people around the world are able to benefit from the experience, insights, and wisdom of the many truly outstanding people who are guests on this show. And in case you haven't heard, you can now ask our guests questions. You can do this by simply going to our website at seatpodcast.com. That's SEAT podcast.com. And there's a form where you can submit your question and we will forward it to the guest. Today I'm speaking with Heather Hansen, global communication consultant, TEDx speaker, trainer, and author of Unmuted: How to Show Up, Speak Up, and Inspire Action. In this podcast, Heather shares insights into what leaders overlook when trying to build more participation from their multicultural teams, how CEOs and C-suite leaders can encourage a culture of open listening, and how to develop what she refers to as unmuted leaders in organizations. Before we get started, if you're a supply chain executive who'd like to finally put an end to information overload and get a simple, concise, fact-based summary of key market developments and shifts, then the current situation is exactly what you're looking for. To get access or to learn more, go to thecurrentsituation.net. I'll put a link in the show notes, and of course there'll also be information over on our website. Now let's sit down with Heather and find out how we can get our teams to speak up and be heard. Heather, I'm really excited to have you on the show. I think it's really interesting what you've been doing and what you've been championing with Unmuted. Perhaps you can start by just giving us some background about what you did and what motivated you to do it.
Well, gosh, how far back should we go? I'm originally from California. I've been living abroad for 20 years now. So I've been interested in international relations and the world around us and cross-cultural relationships, pretty much my whole life. And I've always been interested in communication as well. So my original university degree is International Studies, Language and Society. And I have a second degree in German language. Wow. So very, very interested in linguistics. And even at that time, my thesis for my bachelor's was all about how we were using English across cultures, across languages in global settings. And that has been my passion ever since. My entire career has been dedicated to this, where I help very top level global professionals with their presentation skills, articulation training, so they can be best understood globally, not making them sound American or like the Queen, but how do we speak clearly and be best understood, as well as cross-cultural communication, leadership, strategic leadership communication. So I do a lot of coaching, mentoring, consulting, training, speaking on all things global communication. And so, of course, the book Unmuted is all about that. It's actually the fifth book that I've worked on. Three, wow. I was a contributor. My first book was called Powerful People Skills. That was published back in 2009. So it's been a long time since I did a new book. And it was actually in the beginning going to be an update of Powerful People Skills. But then the pandemic hit. And I felt like, there was much more to be said than just an update of something for the digital age. We were in an entirely new world when we started going through the pandemic. And I got so tired of hearing people say, you're on mute, you're on mute, you're on mute on every single video call. But then it hit me one day. I thought, you know what? We've been on mute for a really long time. There are a lot of us who have been on mute in our meetings, in our teams, in our lives, in our communities, in our families. We've been on mute. And I think now we've had this massive reawakening where we're ready to re-enter the world with new passion, and we're ready to press unmute. And I'm hoping this book will be the guide taking us into this new world. And that's really where it all came from.
Wow, that's really, I love that concept. And I think It's particularly relevant, like you said, not just during the pandemic, but I think also as we do much more international and cross-cultural business and try to build teams that are more engaged and make people feel more involved when you are, as you were pointing out, working with multiple cultures. So what do you think, from your experience, is the biggest challenge that leaders face when they're trying to establish better communication across multicultural teams? What do you feel that leaders might be getting wrong?
I think a lot of them simply are lacking some self awareness. So, not realizing just how important these cultural differences can be, and also maybe thinking of culture as being national culture instead of simply being interpersonal difference. So, I mean, we can talk about big C culture of the Americans are like this and the Germans are like that. But I mean,
Right.
I've been out of America for 20 years. How long have you been in Hong Kong? Years and years.
A long time, yes.
Yeah. And, we aren't necessarily that American anymore from the big C cultural perspective. We've changed a lot. We've had different experiences. We've lived in different cultures, and that impacts us all in different ways. And I think thinking that, oh, he's German, therefore he's punctual and he's very direct in his speech, and this is the way he's going to behave. And the Japanese, oh, they aren't going to speak up in the meeting and they're going to be very timid and they are going to respect authority. Having those kinds of stereotype big C cultural norms can be really dangerous. And I think that we mistreat people based on them. So it's around being aware of our own biases, where we're from, what kind of cultural ideas we have from our upbringing, our education, our family, our backgrounds, what we're bringing to the table, and then understanding each person individually, not just as, oh, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Singaporeans. That doesn't really get us anywhere, and it gets us stuck in stereotypes. So it's about treating each person individually, understanding their unique strengths and being able to communicate in that way. So it's not as cookie cutter simple as, putting everyone on a spectrum and deciding like, oh, you're more like this or more like that. It's much more nuanced. And I think we forget that in a lot of our global communication.
Yeah, I think those are really important points. And you're right. We tend to overlook that, and it's easy, right, to generalize. It's more difficult to try to get to know people on an individual level and understand. You talk about the unmuted organization. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means, or what does that look like?
Well, I think that organization is my dream for organizations that are run more like communities, where everyone feels included, where they feel like they belong in the team. I hesitate to say family. I don't think that work is necessarily a family, but I think it is a community. And we want to belong in that community, and we want to speak up, and we want to be acknowledged. We want to be heard. And so an unmuted organization is one where everyone feels included. They feel that they can speak up with confidence and that they will be acknowledged and heard. People don't have to necessarily agree, but they should feel safe to speak up. So it's a mix of this connected environment and psychologically safe environment, along with conscious communication and this idea that we're self-aware and aware of others and those cross-cultural nuances, and that we also have the confidence to speak up. And when we have those three parts, it makes this unmuted Venn diagram, if you think of it that way, of conscious, confident, and connected. And that overlap is what I consider to be unmuted. So we all know people, right, who are maybe the overlap of connected and confident, but they aren't very conscious. And those people end up being a little too loud, right? We all know people who come into the meeting and they're too loud. And I can be that way as well, right? I mean, depending on context, we shift. It's not a personality profile, right? But then other people might be too soft because they don't have the confidence to speak up, even though they're connected and conscious. And then other people might be on mute if they're in a toxic environment that is disconnected and their leaders aren't listening to them. They just give up, say, forget it. I'm not going to share my ideas anymore because you're not listening anyway. You don't acknowledge my contribution. Why should I even try anymore? They press mute. And that is by far the biggest loss of human potential that we're seeing in global organizations.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. And I think that I love the way you have framed that it's a community, because I think that previously everyone said that the company or the particular office in which people were working was like a family. And the dynamics of that are a bit difficult to always apply into a company. But when you frame it as a community, I think you can really start to see how you can gain what you're talking about, which is better communication.
Yeah. I don't think I want my workplace to be a family
Right.
necessarily. The
Yeah,
way that I speak in my family relationships and interact is very different than a professional workplace.
that's
And
right.
sometimes I think in our quest for authenticity, we think that we need to be the same person at home and in the office, but we aren't the same person.
That's
We
right.
have our
Yeah.
professional persona and we have our family ties and bonds and close friendships. And these things are different. I'm not sure we necessarily have to be the same. And that's why I also talk about something in the book called um, authentic adaptability.
Oh,
And
that's
that's
interesting.
about staying true to your values, but it
Mm,
doesn't mean that your behaviors don't necessarily change because we
right.
need to create that bridge, especially in multicultural environments, create that bridge of connection with another human. And that might mean that I change the English that I use, that I speak in a different style, that I might dress differently, which is appropriate for that culture that I'm in. And these behavioral changes, I don't believe are taking anything away from my authenticity as an individual, as long as I'm still aligned with my values and who I
Right.
am as a person. But I have to say, that was probably the hardest chapter for me to write. I think that we are very much following this idea that we need to be authentic, we need to be authentic. But I would argue that so many people don't even know who they are.
Right.
How are you
Yes.
being authentic? You don't even know what your values are. Ask five leaders what their personal values are, and they're going to struggle. And so I think that there is a real need for adaptability in order to be successful communicators and leaders in multicultural environments.
Yeah, I really like the fact that you brought that up because I think that being authentic has been misinterpreted in a sense
Yeah.
to being sloppy. For
Mm-hmm.
lack of a better word, I'm not saying that's the best way to
Yeah.
explain
Or
it.
being a jerk, or
Right,
it's like,
right,
well, this is
right,
me. I'm being authentic. This is just
right,
my
right.
communication style. I'm very direct. You should just
Yeah.
deal with it because that's who I am. And
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
not what it's
Exactly.
about, right? We still need to
Exactly.
adapt and
Right.
meet halfway and build that bridge of understanding. And that doesn't mean we're being inauthentic because
Yeah.
we change our communication style or we try. I think it has to do with intention, right? Of
Yes.
what's my
Yes.
intention in changing my behavior right now? Is it to connect and create a stronger community, or is it to manipulate, or is it to get my
Right.
way? That's
Yes.
a little bit different. That's being inauthentic in my book. That's what I would classify as inauthentic connection.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think you're right. It really comes down to authenticity is values, intention, integrity, not so much like you said about saying, well, I'm just a very direct person. That's the way I am. Or, I'm not a morning person. That's just the way I am kind of thing. And I'm just being
Right.
authentic. Well, no, not really. You need to have a certain, I don't know what you'd call it, for lack of a better word, manners
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
protocol and so forth. But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean you're
Mm-hmm.
not authentic, as you're pointing out. I think that's,
No,
you know,
not at all. I don't think so. I mean, and I think it's because I've lived in so many places, spoken so many languages, met so many different people. I'm constantly changing my behavior and trying to find a way to connect with people and
right,
build that community, that sense of belonging, right? And it doesn't mean that I'm trying to be fake or superficial or anything else. It's just how can I best connect to give this person what they need from me in that moment, and so that
right,
I can also get what I need in that moment so that we can build something together. And that's really what it comes down to in a global workplace. How can we get the job done together? And if that means I'm going to change my communication style, I will,
right. Yeah.
to get that job done with the least amount of misunderstanding and miscommunication possible, right?
Yeah, I think that touches back on what you had originally pointed out about being adaptable. And being adaptable doesn't necessarily mean being inauthentic or being manipulative. It
Exactly.
just simply means that as people, we have to be able to in some way modify ourselves a little bit in order to enhance communication, enhance workplace productivity, and so forth. So I think it's really good that you pointed that out. I think a lot of people get stuck on that because they feel that if I do anything other than the way I am, let's say when I'm at home with my immediate family, then I'm being inauthentic.
Yeah, and we'll see how people respond to that in the book. So far, it seems to be resonating with people, but I felt that I
Right,
was going a bit against the grain of what's popular these days of
right,
no you must be authentic. Well, we've kind of, like you said, we've changed the meaning of that a bit. People are taking it a bit too far. So we'll see what people think, but that's my personal view on it anyway.
Yeah, I think the right people will understand what you're saying. And I think that you're right. There are narratives that tend to get a life of their own. Once they're put out there, one person says it, and then everybody else it becomes like an echo chamber amongst, regular media, social media, and before you know it, it loses a lot of its validity. So I think that what you've done in your book is really important. And I think a lot of people will feel very reassured to hear your point of view, because a lot of people were thinking, I just don't see myself coming into the workplace and just doing whatever I want and claiming that I'm being authentic. So I think it is very good, and it will definitely resonate with the right people. You were talking about before the fact that you've lived in many parts of the world, and certainly a lot of people who are listening to this podcast are working with teams where people are in many different places, where English might not be their first language, or where another language that's predominantly spoken within the company might not be spoken by other people. How do you cross over that and create the community and the level of communication that you were talking about before, when you do have people on the team where the language they're most comfortable in is not the same as many other people? How do you help those people engage and speak up? We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Mm-hmm. This is a huge challenge in a lot of international organizations. Obviously, the world's language in business has become English in almost all cases. When we're talking about cross-cultural and international communication, it's primarily going to be in English. And that creates some challenges for a lot of people. I mean, about 1/3 of the world's population speaks English, but that means 2/3 don't.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
aren't even a part of this conversation, right?
Yes.
And yet it's the English speaking world that is running business, education, everything. So, when's the last time you really dug for an article that was written in an academic publication that wasn't in English? I mean, how would you even interact with that knowledge? And you probably wouldn't unless it was translated to English. So we know that people who are born into English have an automatic privilege in the world. And this is something that we don't hear people talking about when they talk about linguistic inclusion and language diversity and these things. What we're typically hearing is people talk about using neutral language at work. So stop saying you guys when there's women in the room, because that's leaving out women, right? And this is what we're focused on in DEI is how do we choose the right words to speak in a neutral and inclusive way? But it goes so much deeper than that. Because we know that when people come together, those who are more confident in the language are going to tend to dominate the discussion. They may be quicker to jump in. They may not give enough time for the non-native speaker to really get their thoughts together. They might think, they don't do it on purpose, but they might think that, they don't have anything to say. They haven't spoken up yet. Okay, let's move to the next topic. They were just about to put their hand in the air. They were just like right there. And I know this because I've been on the other side. I've been on the side when I've lived in Denmark for a total of 8 years combined. I speak the language fluently. So I'm fluent in Danish. Kids speak Danish now, all of that. We speak a real mix at home. But when I was in a professional setting in Denmark, I am definitely too soft. I'm lacking the confidence to speak up. I put my hand up in the meeting, volunteer to speak, even though I can speak in front of thousands of people in English. And that's why I'm saying, we move around that Venn diagram based on our context. And I know from my own personal experience that I can be incredibly confident, too loud in certain circumstances in English, yet put me in Danish and I'm a totally different person. I often say, if you don't know me in English, you do not know me, because I'm a very different person in another language, and much more quiet and not as confident. And I think, for me, someone who speaks, I know I speak the language very well, and I still struggle with that. Think of how many people, all of my clients, I've built an enormous business on this particular bias that we have for leaders with eloquent communication styles. And we like to believe that people who are eloquent are also really good leaders, and there's no correlation there, none. And yet we keep promoting people or not promoting them based on their communication skills. So I tend to have people come to me who have almost broken into the C-suite, or maybe are an acting member of C-suite, haven't been fully given the job. And it's the communication skills holding them back, which means maybe someone in the organization thinks their accent is too heavy and they're too hard to understand, or, oh, they're too direct, or they're not direct enough, or they don't have enough presence, right? To be a true leader, meaning they aren't eloquent enough in their mind to be that strong leader in the organization, or to represent the company globally in conferences, industry events, with the board of directors, whatever it might be. So we know that these biases are really at play. They're at play in hiring decisions, that people are not being hired, people are not being promoted. And we have to remember that these are deep-seated biases that we have growing up around accents we like and don't like, types of communication styles we like and don't like. And it's skewed very Western, because this is what we see in movies, in media, in music, in radio, in everything. How many people come to me and say, Heather, I want to sound like you. And I always say, why? Why would you want to sound like me? What is it about how I speak that you are drawn to, or you think you want to sound like? Because a lot of times it's the accent that they want. And I say, I don't think you want my accent. I think you want to be understood. What is it about my accent you like? Oh, it's so clear. And oh, your voice goes up and down and you pause. And okay, well, these are different things. That's not accent. You can still sound like a Singaporean speaker of English, an Indian speaker of English. We're going to clarify some of those word endings. We're going to help you with some of the vowels just to get the sounds in place. And then we can teach you the other ways of speaking, but it doesn't mean you have to lose your accent and your identity and who you are. It's such a huge part of us. So it breaks my heart when people come to me saying, I want to change my accent. I don't think that's really what it is, but I do understand why they want that, because it could be holding them back.
Right. Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think that not every company, but very often, whether it be companies or even non-company situations, there's a propensity to reward affectation a lot more than to try to look deeper at actual actions. And that's a problem for those people who don't have, like you say, that what I would call a big personality, but might be very, very talented, right? So, sort of that what you might call introverted expert who has a tremendous
and they just get
amount
looked over.
Yeah, exactly
looked
right.
over just because they aren't the loudest in the meeting. And so, there's a lot of things I talk about in the book about how we can change that by, putting out the agenda before the meeting, having people prepare and actually write down what they want to say about certain topics. Because another thing that happens,
that's a great idea. Yeah.
And somebody says something and it sounds so great. And then everyone just agrees with that person. Oh, I feel the same. I feel the same. If you were to look at their notes on paper that they brought into the meeting, they probably had very different things written down. But that eloquent, loud speaker spoke up and said it so well that it's like, no, actually, I agree with that. No, that's great. Let's do that. Well, what was your idea? We're losing all these other ideas. We're losing our ability to innovate because we keep falling back on the first idea that's mentioned in an eloquent way that we all think is wonderful, right? So, giving people that opportunity to really write things down and then discuss them and read what they actually thought before they walked in the room and then discuss the pros and cons. Also giving everyone equal time to speak. We know that it's not so much the diversity, demographic diversity, but the cognitive diversity, the diversity of thought that comes out in a meeting. And the highest performing teams, a few of these studies are showing now, are ones where there's equal talk time. So that means even someone who's like, no, I don't need 5 minutes. Well, give them 5 minutes because they're going to end up talking it out and finding other things to say when they're given that space. So it's about creating these more inclusive environments where we really do encourage people to share. And I know that this is a very Western way of doing things, right?
Yes.
I am testing this quite a bit with my clients here in Asia, because there are people who are very uncomfortable with this idea of being put on the spot for 5 minutes and having to speak and share their ideas. And it does make me question, is this going to work in an Asian context? Can we create these kinds of cultures in an Asian context where true deep-rooted cultural differences are at play, where will not say something opposite to my superior because that is so ingrained in me. It was like me calling my professors at university doctor or professor, and then I go to Denmark for a master's and they're like, no, just call me by my first name. And I'm like, I can't do that. Like, I can't do that. That is just wrong. In the whole semester, it was like, Dr. So-and-so, just call me Dennis, Heather. No, Dr. So-and-so.
Yeah. I'm the same way. I mean, I was brought up that you need to address people. Mrs. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, you would never address someone by their first name unless they invited you to do so.
Exactly. And even that's a bit old fashioned, I think, now in the States. I think it's changing, but still, it's just, there are some things like that I think, if I was sitting in a meeting and someone said, okay, you're going to get 5 minutes right now, and that was just so out of my comfort zone, I think we have to very slowly introduce these kinds of concepts and give people an opportunity to embrace them in a way that makes them comfortable.
Right.
And we can't just say, okay, look from tomorrow, we're going to do it this way. That also doesn't work. We need to slowly make these changes according to people's comfort levels. And I am very aware of that because I think, we have so much leadership information, knowledge that comes from the Western world. And it's impossible, as much as I want to make my book as friendly to Eastern cultures as possible, my upbringing is my upbringing. My perspective of the world will always be a Western perspective, even after living here almost 15 years. Right. And so I see both sides, but still my words will always have a Western perspective. So how do we find that balance? And so I am looking forward to people challenging the things that I've written, especially here in Asia, to bringing forward alternate views, to saying, how could we use this in a way that makes sense in our organization? And so one thing I love about the book is I created a discussion guide that goes with it. And there are videos for every single chapter. So teams can watch that video and work through the discussion guide and start these conversations to find out, how can this work for them? Because I don't claim to have all the answers. I wrote the book so I could try to figure it out. And I think it's just the start of the conversation. And I hope that people will move it forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it, because everything isn't necessarily a recipe that has to be followed exactly. A lot of what you're bringing forward are things that people can understand the concept, and as you're pointing out, adapt it within their organization. And there may be some organizations that simply need to do things the way they've been doing it because everyone is of a certain culture and that's where they feel comfortable. But there's other organizations that will look at what you're doing and find a tremendous amount, I believe, of inspiration and a chance to really see a way to improve what they're doing and become more inclusive. So I think it's going to serve, I think what you're doing is going to serve a lot of people.
Oh, well, I hope you're right. Thank you.
So Heather, you have shared so many interesting things, and everything you've done with the book and backing it up with the video and so forth is just wonderful. How can people find you? How can they find your book?
Mm-hmm. Well, the book and all the information about the book can be found at heatherhansen.com/unmuted, but you'll be able to read about, my speaking and writing and the things I'm really passionate about there. My company in Singapore is called Global Speech Academy. So you can find all the information about our programs and coaching at globalspeechacademy.com. So yeah. And of course, I'm always happy to connect on LinkedIn as well. I love meeting people and discussing things there as well.
Well, I'll definitely include all of that in the show notes and over on our website as well at seatpodcast.com. And I hope everyone will take the opportunity to look at what you're doing. I think it's wonderful. I think the timing couldn't be better for people to be able to go a little deeper into building these, as you say, these corporate communities. And I just think it's great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jane. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you for tuning in to A Seat at the Table. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something from it, I'd love to hear about it. Your feedback powers this show. If you'd like to support the show, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Also, share episodes you found valuable on LinkedIn or other social media, and call out your biggest insight or takeaway from the program. And don't forget to tag me, Jane Singer. I'd love to see which episodes you like best. And if you have time, please leave a review on any of the major podcast channels. As I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, A Seat at the Table has a new feature. If you've ever listened to a podcast and thought, I have a question, well, now you can ask. I'll be letting you know about upcoming guests on our show, and you can send in questions. Also, you can ask questions after the show, and we'll forward them to our guests for feedback. If you'd like to participate or just want to learn more, head on over to our website at seatpodcast.com. That's SEAT podcast.com for all of the details. The links will also be in the show notes. You can leave any thoughts, feedback, or suggestions there, and yes, I will read them. Thank you for joining me today and for supporting the show. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next episode of A Seat at the Table.